Hi, I'm Pastor Sarah Stobie, and you are here at week 18 of our Biblical Lit series. Welcome. Biblical Lit is our year-long journey together reading the Bible, and some weeks are better than others, right, my friends? This week is a pretty good week. In fact, this week is one of the better weeks, so I hope you're engaged. Week 18 is First Chronicles chapter 17 all the way through Second Chronicles chapter 11, and it reads really well, easily. Last week we had a lot of descendants and we had a lot of things that were just kind of you skip through. And that's okay. That's okay. But this week it's actually really a good read. But let's talk about this. Why do we even have First and Second Chronicles? We already had these stories earlier in our Old Testament readings, right? We already knew most of this because of Second Samuel and the story of Solomon. We'd already read this. So why is there a second version? Well, let me explain that. And actually, my study Bible does it so succinctly, I'm going to read it from that, okay? The two books, it says, that are now known as First and Second Chronicles were originally a single work. It was originally a single work, and it was called the Book of the Event of the Days. That's what it was called. And they were written, this two books we call First and Second Chronicles, but at the time it was just one. It was written in Jerusalem by an anonymous author called literally just the chronicler. And this author is why it's called First and Second Chronicles. Now, when was this written? Well, it was written somewhere, let's just say 540 to 340 BCE. Okay, I know that's a really long lifespan, right? Yeah, they really don't know when, but they do know why. And that's what I want to focus on right now. If you read through First and Second Chronicles carefully, you're going to notice some things. This is a very pasteurized, I'm going to say that word, version of David and Solomon's kingly activities. There's no Bathsheba story or the killing of Uzziah in First and Second Chronicles. Solomon and his wanton ways and his escapades, you're not going to find them either. This is a very sanitized reading of King Solomon, King David. And there's a reason for that. The chronicler was writing these events for the Jewish people who had been in exile. Now, you probably know from just history and previous homilies how the Jewish people, the Israelites, were defeated by the Babylonians. And the Babylonians basically packed up and took many, many of the Israelites and scattered them throughout the Babylonian Empire. It was called the diaspora, kind of like the diaspora spores, seeds. They were scattered all over the Babylonian Empire. And they, in most cases, were allowed to remain Jewish in practice, but a lot of them lost track. A lot of them did. And the Babylonian exile lasted for quite some time. So people lost track. And when they were finally allowed to come back to their homeland, if you will, they had a lot of questions. They wanted to know, why is this land so important? What is our heritage? Who was King David? Now, they knew some things about King David because the oral tradition was very strong, but the chronicler really wrote it down. And that's why you have that genealogy in the beginning of First Chronicles, because the chronicler wants people to see where they are from. So these are the descendants. Well, where am I? I'm from the house of Reuben. Where am I in the descendant list? This was why that's in there. And then we begin with Saul's death and we go into David's reign. And again, it gives them a sense of placement. It gives them a sense of understanding their history. It talks about the Ark of the Covenant again, and it gives them a sense of why the Ark was so important. It gives them a sense of why they have to rebuild the temple, because remember, that is what they do. They ask the Babylonian and Persian kings that they were under to be released and then to go back and rebuild the wall. And the Persian king says, by all means, go ahead, because what does that mean? He'll get more money as tribute. But anyway, politics. They do. They go back and they rebuild things. And the chronicler tells them why these things are important. If you look through First Chronicles, like I said, you're going to see that there's no scolding of David from Nathan. There's no Bathsheba story. There's no death of Uriah. It literally is just about David being a faithful king. And then we get into Solomon. And again, Solomon's the exact same way. Solomon's all about how wise he is. Solomon is all about the good things that he did, how people would come and bring him gifts, and how, again, the chronicler saying that this was the time when everyone was paying tribute to the king over Israel versus all other kings. So it's sanitized and it's exaggerated, I think I can even say. But at the same time, these stories reconnected the Jewish people to God. And at the same time, these stories showed the people of God, the chosen ones of God, that even though they had been taken away and that they had been in exile, they were now returned. And it gave them a sense of history. I think we all have stories in our families that are sanitized. And I think we all have stories about, well, how we came to be here in the United States, unless your heritage is of First Peoples and First Peoples of the First Nation here. But most of us have stories about how our people came to be where they are now. And the truth is, they are sanitized. They are cleaned up, if you will. And why do we do that? Well, we do that because, well, first of all, memories always do change as we get older. We focus more on the good than the bad. And we also want to leave the best of what we've done as our memories to generations to come. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying that we have to lie, though, either. But certainly what the chronicler does here in 1st and 2nd Chronicles is give the very best of David and the very best of Solomon as examples for the Jewish people to follow and for them to feel proud of and for them to reconnect to God. Now, I know as we were reading through Solomon, I said to you that Solomon was not a great king because Solomon did a lot of bad things. And Solomon took a lot of women to be his one-time bride. We talked about the concubines and we talked about the harems and we talked about all that. And Solomon was human. But God, even through all of that, loved Solomon. And so somehow we have to read both accounts of Solomon, both accounts of David, with their sins and with their good deeds, and recognize that we ourselves, as human beings today, we have both good and bad as well. And I take it to heart that God does not remember all my past bad deeds of my past, and that I can overcome them. And yes, my daughters, many, many, many years from now, will not remember some of the bad things. And maybe that is a blessing from God. So, week 18, keep reading. It is a good read. It is a great reminder of God's purpose and God's working with David and Solomon. So by all means, do read, and I hope you enjoy it. But as you're reading it through, yeah, think about how God looks at our entire lifespan, and how we ourselves also rely on God in all that we do, our good and our bad. And yeah, maybe give thanks to your descendants who, through a lot of hard work, good and bad, brought you to this place so that you could prayerfully do God's will and do good as you are able now. And that's really what we're just trying to do, isn't it? God's peace to you, God's grace, God's love. And I'll see you next time for week 19.